It's the Church Solutions Podcast, and my name is Phil Thompson. Steve Lacy is not with us today. He's actually on a little vacation with his wife, celebrating 38 years together. And so we are happy for him. He's gone for a little while. So you got me, but we do have a guest today. And before we get to our guest, I just want to make a few announcements. This is episode number 436, but who's counting, right? One of the things I do want to let you know about is this podcast is brought to you by Daily Dive 365.com, and it's all about preach once, inspire daily. Daily Dive 365.com will create podcasts for you. It will create devotionals for you, sermon clips, which is kind of a hot thing now. You can even get on Amazon Alexa devices. So if you get around to it, check it out. Just go to dailydive365.com. Don't do it now, but do it eventually. Also, want to remind you that we have a webinar coming up. We do webinars every month. We've been doing this now for a couple of years. And the webinar is called Stop Streaming to the Lazy. Rethink your digital ministry strategy. And that's going to be happening on July 16th at 12 noon Eastern time. And you can sign up for that. It's free. And again, we don't spend a lot of time normally. We will probably be about a half hour, and then we'll have some Q&A. And our guest for this webinar coming up is Graham Spencer, who is from Scotland, and we're looking forward to having him. So sign up today. Even if you can't make it, if you sign up, you will get the recording. So there you go. Webinar.streamingchurch.tv. Stop streaming to the lazy. Rethinking your digital ministry strategy. All right. So I want to get to our guest today. I want to let you know a little bit about him. Our next guest is a minister and production director at Life Mission Church in the Kansas City area. He's led church production for over a decade and has a degree in music business and journalism from Ferris State University. That's from Michigan, right? Is Ferris State in
Yep.
Michigan?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Ferris
Grant,
State. We're about an hour north of Grand Rapids. Yeah.
okay, Grand Rapids. All right, good. I was going to say that. And you can follow him on LinkedIn, of course, or X, Instagram, or Substack. Please welcome Joseph Cottle to the Church Solutions Podcast. Joseph, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Phil. I'm really excited. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we mentioned before, speaking of podcast here, you also produce a podcast. Tell us a little bit about it before we get into our topic today.
Yeah, so I just started hosting and producing the churchproduction.com podcast. I think we just call it the Church Production Podcast. And that's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to talk to some really great people. I just wrapped up an episode with the project manager at Church of the Highlands, talking about managing big integrations. We kind of kicked off this reboot of the podcast with the video director from Bethel Music, Luke Manwaring, who's just a really sweet guy. And I got to have a conversation last month with a guy who's on my team here at Life Mission. His name's Isaac Alonji, and he's an Emmy-winning film director. And we talked about lighting because all his stuff looks really good. And I figured he'd be a great person to tell us about lighting. So if you get a chance, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, you can listen. And we also, throw episodes out on the website as well. So churchproduction.com.
All right, good deal. I did see that article, and I was intrigued by that because lighting is something that we don't talk a lot. Maybe I can get his contact information from you. Maybe we can hit him up and see if
Absolutely.
he'd be willing to
He
talk to
loves
us.
he loves to share. He loves to give away knowledge for free all the
Yeah.
time. So
Well, that's good. That's good. That's a good deal. Okay, so you write lots of articles, and I came across an article that you wrote called "Leading with Intention: Why Tech Skills Alone Aren't Enough for Production Teams." So I want to talk a little bit about that because we do streaming video here among other things, and being involved in church for a long time, uh, tech is tech skills are important. Tech teams are important for churches, of course. So let's talk a little bit about your article here. And by the way, where was that at? Was that production? Where was the article published?
it's that's at churchproduction.com as well.
Church
Yeah.
production. Okay. Okay. Good.
Yep.
All right. So elaborate a little bit here on the
Mhm.
difference between a leader who relies, solely on his skills and one who leads by intention.
Sure. Uh, Obviously, for this job, we all have to have tech skills. Whatever you're working with, you need to know how to work with it, especially if you're in charge of the department. And maybe not the department, if you're at a smaller church, but definitely in charge of your team. You need to have that base understanding of the gear you're working with, and you need to have a competency with the gear you're working with. But if that's all you have, your team is essentially going to fall apart because you have to be able to train people on how to use those things, and that requires just certain people skills. The ability to you're almost, when you're training, you're kind of getting inside of somebody else's head. It's and figuring out, okay, how are they, what's going on here? So you have to actually ask more questions, I think, than just, relay information and expect people to just copycat. Um, so that's part of it. Um, and I think the training part is still a very practical thing. But the soft skill of it, if we're talking hard skills versus soft skills, hard skills being something like operating a camera or a video switcher, etc. Um, the soft skills of it is, what kind of rapport, are you building with your team? What sort of leader are you on Sunday? Are you anxious? Are you kind of tough and a little mean? Or are you coming to weekends or whatever service you're doing at your church? Are you coming to it um, with the presence of Christ in mind? That's the big thing. Are you being present to Christ and then thus being present to your team? I struggled with this personally for a long time when I was really first getting started out in this, and I ended up going seeing a great therapist about it because I was the anxious leader,
Mhm.
and when I am anxious, it makes me kind of mean. I can be a bit of a jerk. So uh, I spent a couple months with this therapist working through it, and thankfully, he was a believer as well. And your therapist doesn't always have to be a believer, but it is helpful. And so he came with all of his knowledge of psychology and the way our minds work, but also he came with the presence of the Holy Spirit. And during one particular session, he said, I've been praying about this and praying about you, and the Lord wanted me to share this with you. And he shared with me a verse from Zechariah, and where the Lord is speaking to Zerubbabel, who I do believe was the high priest at the time. This is when the Israelites are returning from Babylon and Persia to kind of reestablish their home in Palestine. And he said, the word of the Lord was not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. And that really changed my outlook about what I was doing. Anytime I was with my team or prepping for a service or an event we had going on, it wasn't so much about how exactly we're going to pull this off. What gear do I have? What stage build do I need to do? Those things were still important. But what I found is all of a sudden those just kind of became minor details. And the more important thing was how am I being Jesus to my team? How am I pointing them to Jesus? How am I being an example of Jesus to my team? How am I relaying the heart of the Father to my team? And if it's all about just getting all the little details right and nailing the production, we're going to miss that. We have to come to everything we do as production leaders, and some of us function in that role as a staff pastor. Some of us function in it. In my case, I'm a licensed minister, so it's a little bit different. So I can do pastory things, but I don't have to go to all the meetings, which is great. Uh, um, and some of us, we're uh, I don't want to say just church staff, but we're outside of that pastoral role. But regardless, it's all shepherding, and it's all um, everything we do um, is more than just, hey, let's accomplish this goal, let's pull off this event, let's pull off this service. Everything we do, we have to bring the full intent and presence of our spirit to the presence of Christ, and then we can then share that dwelling with him, that abiding with him, with our team.
So I was smiling earlier when you said you get kind of anxious and maybe get kind of mean because I can relate to that, and I can tell you a story later about that. But let me ask you this:
Sure.
if you're a leader and you're also pretty tech savvy, and so let's
Hmm.
say you're leading your tech department,
Yeah.
do you think that is it something about the personality, especially? I mean, I don't want to say everybody that's a tech guy is nerdy, but sometimes
But we
the
are.
well, and the relationship aspect of it,
Yeah.
right? It's not, sometimes we're introverts or whatever, and
Hmm.
the relationship aspect is not always on the front burner.
Sure.
We're nerdy, we're into tech stuff, and we haven't really developed maybe
Hmm.
that warm personality kind of a thing. So, I mean, what are some personal examples that you could
Yeah.
give to kind of warm up people to your
Yeah.
presence?
I took the Myers-Briggs personality profile once, and I scored really high on the introversion scale. Like I think it was like 75 plus percent. Um, and I always struggled with small talk and uh, just being chummy, shaking hands, kissing babies, that kind of thing. It wasn't really my thing. I am inherently introverted. I can be alone for days, and it's great. I love it.
I do
Okay.
too.
Um, so w- when I was coming up in leadership, I read something great from Donald Miller. If you're not familiar with him, he's written some great books like Blue Like Jazz and A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. And now he's kind of switched over to business leadership stuff. It's still really great. Um, but he posted on his blog, this was years ago. I don't even think you can find it anymore. How he manages small talk because he's not outgoing either. He's a writer. He's introverted as heck. And he said what changed it for him was realizing that small talk, relating to people, um, making that connection. It wasn't about putting on an act. It wasn't about just trying to do it to pretend like you're extroverted. It was just about letting people understand that they're seen. Period. And that really changed it for me. And so I guess I no longer felt the pressure to like talk about the weather or something, but just to notice people. And I think as introverts, that's actually, if we're honest, I think part of introversion and also being a little bit nerdy is we're people watchers. My wife and I are both that way. She even scored higher on the Myers-Briggs introversion scale than me. And so if we're out on a date night, like half the time we're just sitting at the restaurant watching people and kind of chuckling to ourselves because that's just part of what we do. But the superpower there, I think, for leaders who are introverted and maybe a little nerdy and really care a lot about the hard skill thing and are working on the soft skill thing is you can take those little powers of observation that you have inherently and you can turn that on people and use that to help people feel seen because that's what they want. They want to feel seen and they want to feel understood. And so and people love to talk about themselves, it turns out. So if you see somebody and you notice something, say something. It's pretty simple. See something, say something. Like there's a guy on my team who he's been having some health issues. He had to have back surgery. He actually hasn't been able to serve on my team in almost a year because of all these health problems. When I see him on Sunday, I I say, hey, Ed, how's it going? How are you feeling? What's going on? How can I pray for you? I have another guy on my team who I think he's even nerdier than me. But in addition to the tech stuff that he does with my team, he's one of our great camera operators. He's a novelist. He's been writing books. And I write a little bit too. So I asked him about that. Hey, how's the novel stuff going? I know you're working on artwork and you're playing around with AI. How's that going? So just using those kind of inherent powers of observation that we have anyways, and then just turning it towards people and making them feel seen and making them feel noticed. Because when they feel seen and noticed, they're going to feel loved.
Yeah, that's good. I speaking of talking about myself, I was thinking I managed a Christian radio station when I was in my early to mid 20s, and I was your typical type A, real driven.
Mm,
And we decided one time to have a little party, a pool party at my place. I lived in a townhouse complex, and we had a community pool. It's big, And so I rented the community pool and I had everybody from the station come down. We had a pool party and we had a blast. I mean, we had just so much fun. And after that, I had one or two people come up to me and go, we've never seen this side of you before,
Yeah.
Phil. This is awesome, and I begin to realize, yeah, I guess maybe I need to loosen up a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Especially in church. And I wrote another article about this a while back for church production. I call it the 70% rule. We get really, I think as tech leaders, we can get really intense about things being done right. Um, and I think in an industry context, like if you're actually working out, for a company or an event company or a big corporation, uh, you are going to have to crank that meter up a little bit more. But at church, church is different. Yes, things have to be excellent, but we can actually lower the bar a little bit because it's the people on our team. It's not so much about them getting it perfect every time. It's about them actually getting to do it at all. And so, um, I think what I've heard, in leadership teachings and all that stuff is the 80% rule. If somebody can do something 80% as well as you, delegate it, let them do it. I go by the 70% rule, which is just knock that down a little bit.
Yeah.
And there was a guy and he actually just left the team because he wanted to go do something else, but he was on my team for about 2 years. And he was a camera operator. He was a little bit older, so he couldn't, didn't really have the strength and mobility anymore to do the handheld shots, but he really liked doing the platform camera. And honestly, I think that's all the skill he had. And we still had to coach him, just about every Sunday. Hey, that shot's a little soft, adjust your focus a little bit. But man, he loved being on the team. Every time he was scheduled, he was there. If we had something extra, I knew I could call him and he would show up and he was happy to serve. And so for me, that's the win. Even if his shots were soft every now and then, who cares? He got to serve. And so it's again, we have to learn, especially in the church context, to turn down that we got to get this right, that techie meter. We got to turn that down just a little bit and realize that the purpose of this is for people to get to serve their brothers and sisters and to get to serve their church and be a part of your team. That's what this is really all about, because that offering of worship is what delights the heart of God anyway. And if it's really excellent, great. And if it's mostly excellent, that's great too. Like
Mhm.
he's happy with it either way.
Yeah. Uh, Changing gears a little bit here,
Sure.
I want to talk about intention, but what has drawn you to this topic of being intentional? I mean,
Oh, wow.
for me, I remember reading a book, The Purpose Driven Church, in the
Hmm.
early '90s or something by Rick Warren, and to
Yep.
me there was a lot of intention in there, and I
Hmm.
really like that. But
Yeah.
what drew you to being really intentional? Why is that an important topic to you?
Well, as a leader, um, people rely on you, plain and simple. Whether that, and in this role, you have people above who are relying on you. Then I have, a team of about 45 volunteers that rely on me, across 3 campuses. And um, so I can't keep all that in my head all the time. And so I have to be, I learned within about the first 3 years of starting in this role, it was at a different church, but that I had to bring a lot more intention to what I was doing if I wanted my team and my church to thrive. And the lesson I learned there, as the rest of my life has gotten more complicated. We have 4 kids, and our oldest is 13, and our youngest is 2, and I've got, a house and a dog and grass and 2 cars and all that. I have to also, I can't just wake up in the morning and wing it. If I wake up in the morning and wing it, it's not going to work. Um, and that also goes for my inner life as well. Um, if I, and I'm saying I, but I really believe this is we, and if we don't if we're not purposeful about um, what the Lord is doing in us right now, if we just wing it, we're gonna miss it.
Right.
um, and and not that there's not grace, but um, that that daily walking with the Lord, and that can look different for a lot of us. Some of us that looks like, a half hour of quiet time in the morning. And it's a little different for those of us that have a bunch of kids and life's going on. You really have to focus on being intentional in love and um, servant, and being having the heart of a servant. It's a little bit different, but I could talk about that a bunch too. But I also have to be intentional about, okay, what have the Lord and I been talking about and what needs to change in me? And so I what that looks like for me is I have some notes on my phone, and I have them hot linked to widgets, and I can just pop it up and, okay, these are my meditations for the day or whatever you want to call it, where I'm just going through, okay, this is what the Lord this is what we've been praying about. This is what I've been praying about with him. And this is what I heard in a sermon, or I had this thought, or my wife and I talked about this. Otherwise, I just kind of go back into default me mode, which default me is a little anxious and a little selfish, but less so as I continue to work on these things. Paul talked about renewing your mind. And so I think for the inner life, the where intention comes in is that's where you begin to renew your mind. The Lord can do stuff in your heart, but that's got to get from in here through this to out here.
Right.
And that takes a lot of intention. So yeah, to circle all the way back, um, I had to be intentional if I wanted my team to thrive, if I want my family to thrive, if I want my marriage to thrive, if I want to thrive as a person, if I want my finances to thrive, I have to be intentional about it, because otherwise it's just gonna do its own thing. I
Yeah.
can't wing it. It's not gonna work.
So you mentioned a little bit about your routine. So somebody
Hmm.
listening to this podcast, maybe they're a leader, maybe they're a tech person. So tell us a little more about a routine. So and I
Mm,
like the fact that it's not just, okay, I'm going to read somebody's devotional and pray.
yeah.
You actually got real specific and actually take notes about things. I mean, what's an example of your routine? So you got four kids.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, do you do a routine in the morning, or do you do it at night when everybody's asleep, or do you run away somewhere
Mm.
in the closet? Just give us a brief example of your routine.
I will try to keep this as brief as possible, because this is actually something I'm really passionate about. I believe in routines, and I think routines are very important,
Yes.
again, for being an intentional person. Um, but kids change that completely. And I recently read a great book that I wish I had read about 4 or 5 years ago, because I was already practicing some things in the book, just again through time and prayer and trying to think about, okay, this isn't working. So what do I need to change? It's called Domestic Monastery by Richard Rohr.
Oh yeah,
And he
yeah.
talks about um, basically two kinds of routines. The first routine is the spiritual routine, which is a set amount of time in prayer, in Bible or worship or whatever, a day. And that's the time where you're essentially just prioritizing your inner life with God. Um, and the most extreme example we have of that is monks and nuns, cloistered people, um, who that's their life, that's what they're doing. But he draws out this point, and he specifically talks about the experience of a monk named Carlo Coretto, who was in if I remember right, the Saharan desert for like 8 years by himself, translating scripture into the Bedouin language. And that's it. It was just him, Bible translation, and Eucharist. He had nothing else. And he came home after that time and visited his mother and realized that his mom, who the whole time had been raising kids and serving her family and doing those things, was actually more patient and kind and just generally more Christ-like than he was. And what clicked for him is he realized, like, she had been in a cloister of her own that whole time. And that's where we're at right now, where my wife and I are at is our home is our little monastery. We are having to learn new things as parents. Like we're kind of parenting ourselves while we're also parenting our kids. Uh, but every day it's living this interrupted life because my wife and I both thrive on routine. We really like that. But um, that's not the priority right now. The priority is we got to get these kids alive through the day, fed, cleaned. And then we also have to help them work through their emotions, and we have to help them learn how to handle their emotions, and we have to teach them how to communicate, and we have to, there's a ton,
Yeah.
there's a lot to do.
Yep.
But in that, the Lord has been making both of us less selfish, more aware, more present to his love. There's no way I could have really, I think, deeply, truly understood the heart of the Father without trying to be a good father. And there's so many times, it's like once a week, I'll have this moment where uh, I feel some kind of affection or something for my kids, and the Lord's like, and that's how I feel about you. You know, Jesus used that principle over and over again in the Gospels. He gives us an example of a good thing that we feel, and then he says, and how much more does your heavenly Father feel or do X for you? Um, so right now, there the routine is um, get up as early as our bodies will allow, which is different every day, because sometimes you just need some sleep. The routine is get up and be attentive to the Lord, be attentive to the kids, be attentive to each other as best as we can, and then we fit God and our spirituality in the margins. So when it comes to my place of prayer, it's usually in my bed about 15 minutes before I just completely pass out
Yeah.
at the end of the day. Um, but that isn't to say that the rest of my day isn't spiritual. It's very spiritual because I'm so focused on how do I love my kids well. And anytime you are focusing on love, you are focusing on God because God is love. And he's met me and connected with me there over and over again. And so any encouragement to any of you listening out there that have little kids, don't beat yourself up if you're not getting that hour, devotional time a day. It's okay. The Lord is with you and he anytime you are connecting in love with your family, your spouse, the people in your life, you are connecting with him. And you will find that he'll show up. If he wants to speak something to you, he'll show up. He'll say something. And you're not losing a connection because of your kids or the demands of parenthood. If anything, you're gaining a connection if you're willing to kind of reframe it that way and walk out that time and this time in your life in love.
Yeah. I think I love what you said. And really, what you're being is you're being present to
Mm.
uh,
Of
to
trying to be.
people. Yeah, well, trying to be, and as
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier, being present with your team, but also being present with yourself, which I never was for a long time. And ironically, I've been a Christian since 1976. Ironically, I think I
Hmm.
heard something Jack Kornfield said, who's actually a Buddhist, who talked about being present.
Mm.
I thought, wow, that really resonates with me, And
Yeah.
anyhow, well, look, we're running out of time here, but I wanted to just do one more thing here, and that was what you've said is really good, and I really appreciate it very much. It speaks a lot to me. One of my pet peeves with many people in ministry, especially tech teams, if I can be blunt about it, is there's not a lot for some churches. There's not a lot of planning beforehand,
Mm.
uh, or if there is, it's like the day or two beforehand.
Yeah.
Speak to a little bit about planning your day and leading with
Mm.
intention when it comes to an event that's coming up.
Oh, yeah. Well, so part of our weekly routine at Life Mission is all of the campus pastors, we gather together in the worship and production office every Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, and we go through the service flow for all the campuses every weekend. And now, a value of my team and anybody that comes in my team during my onboarding process, I give them a sheet and it has this written on there and it says, we prepare, but we also prepare to pivot. So sometimes that plan that we've made on Tuesday, that will change sometimes 15 minutes before service on Sunday morning. And that's okay. We have tools like Planning Center and all that to make those changes right now, and it's very fast. But we all come to Sundays knowing what's going on. Now we just did our big what's become our annual conference. It's a missions conference called Go Conference. And it was a big deal. It was Thursday night through Saturday night. It was a lot. But leading up to that, we had, I think it was 3 production meetings. We started with the first one back in, I want to say it was like late February, early March. And we just went through some basic stuff like, are we hosting anybody, any bands from outside the church? What's that going to look like? Who do I need to call? What writers do I need to read? Et cetera, that sort of stuff. Um, we went through just the basic schedule. We didn't even have speakers fleshed out by then and all that. But what were the sessions? We broke down, okay, how long is this session? Where's the teams going to have time to rehearse, things like that. And then just the closer that we got, we had another meeting. And I think like I said, we ended up having 3. Then I think we had one more, like literally like the Tuesday before the conference. Um, as much as I hate meetings, it's always better to over communicate. and
Absolutely.
and just you got to have a plan going in. Now, that doesn't mean that the plan can't change, as long as everybody's understanding, and that's a huge shout out to my leadership that they know that like when they shoot, like if Pastor Clint shoots me a verse at like, something he wants to add to his message at like 8:40, there's a fair chance I'm not going to get that put into ProPresenter because service starts at 9. I got some other stuff going on. So he understands and he's cool with that. But we're also ready to do that all the time. But you have to come in with a plan. And we just did a big integration. We switched our audio system over to Dante and we put in a new Allen and Heath D-Live console. That took some attention too. It's like I had to kind of work with the company that we're buying the gear from and our audio contractors helping us install. It's like, okay, we got to think about this. We want to get this in before Go Conference. So what's the time frame? You just have to kind of work backwards from your end goal and figure out, okay, what are the steps that we need to do to get there? And then, yeah, but don't get crazy about the plan. Like, don't be, it's like things never go to plan, but at least you
Right.
have an idea. At least you have an idea.
Yeah.
And then you can pivot if you need to and rearrange. But you gotta have a plan.
Yeah. And you got to be flexible. All right. So we're out of time here. This went a little different than I expected, but that's okay. I liked it. I liked it a lot. And Joseph Cottle's been our guest. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn, on X, on Instagram, on Substack, and he produces the podcast called Church Productions Podcast.
Church Production Podcast. Yeah.
Okay, good. Church
Yeah,
Production Podcast. I didn't write it down, but I'll write it down
that's
here.
okay.
So be sure and check that out. I think you'll like that a lot. And Joseph, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This has been great.
Hey, thanks for having me, Phil. I had a blast.
All right, good. And we'll have you on again sometime.
That'd be great.
Now that I've connected with you, we'll take advantage of your knowledge and expertise, and we appreciate you sharing that with our listeners today.
Absolutely. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you I love to talk. So whenever you need somebody.
I think it's funny. I mean, I've always kind of been told that you kind of end up with the opposite. I mean, my wife's an extrovert.
Yeah.
Opposites attract, although many times opposites attack. But that's interesting that your wife and you
Yeah.
are both introverts. I guess that's more common than what people
Yeah.
think. But
It is. It is interesting, I guess. But we're opposites in a lot of other ways.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we are same in that way.
Yeah, well, good deal. All right. Well, great. Sounds like you got a great wife and family. All right. So, folks, if you want to reach out to Joseph, you can do that, Joseph Cottle, and you missed all that stuff. You don't want to just reach out to us. You can go to streamingchurch.tv and we'll pass on any messages or information on to Joseph. Be sure and give us a rating if you haven't yet for the Church Solutions podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Love to get your feedback. And be sure and check out our sponsor, Daily Dive 365.com, which actually is us. We did that. It's us. But check it out, dailydive365.com, and check out our webinars. We got one coming up July 16th. Just go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv. And I'm done here. Thank you again, Joseph. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And folks, thank you most of all for spending some time with us on the Church Solutions Podcast. I'm Phil Thompson. On behalf of Steve Lacy, we'll catch you again on another episode. Take care.